Hello everyone, and welcome to the Time to Triple What Will Hold Back the Renewable Vow session. So welcome, thank you for being here, and hopefully an exciting session that we have in store. So my name is Ollie Wilson, and I am the head of RE100 at Climate Group. And maybe for a few of you in the room, you might not be familiar with Climate Group and RE100, so I'll just do a very quick intro on that. So RE100 is a corporate renewable electricity campaign. We have over 430 companies worldwide that have made a commitment to use 100% renewable energy. And what we do is we bring together those companies and use their commitment and their influence to engage with governments around the world to get better renewable energy policies. So hopefully you can see the relevance of our work to this conversation today. And then speaking on renewable energy policy, it was just nearly a year ago at COP in Dubai where we had over 130 countries sign up to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. And that pledge was for a total of 11,000 gigawatts of renewables to be installed. And now you might be thinking, how much is that, 11,000 gigawatts? That is 1,000 cities, the size of the one we're in right now in New York. And I'll let you do the maths on how many times squares that is. So RE100, what we hear from our members is that policy barriers and market design are the key things that are holding back renewable industries in countries, and also holding back the private sector's willingness to be involved in that energy transition. And this is something we're going to look at today. So the session is split into three sections. We have a panel first, and we'll be looking at, from a global perspective, from a corporate buyer's perspective and from policymakers' perspective, what are these barriers and what can we do about them? Then we'll go from that global level to a national level in our second section, and that will be with a case study on South Africa. So we have a government official from South Africa, and we'll be looking at what are the opportunities and the risks that are faced with the energy transition in that country. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a conversation focusing on what companies can actually do, what are the next steps for companies in moving forward with this and how they navigate the challenges. So hopefully you're all ready to go with that first panel. So I'll hand over to our moderator, Maria Gallucci, for that panel. And we can bring her on stage now.
Great, thank you.
Nice, good luck.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maria Gallucci, a senior reporter with Canary Media, a nonprofit news site. This morning, we're bringing together a variety of perspectives, those of renewable developers, suppliers, and policymakers, to address the question, what's needed to triple the world's renewable energy capacity by 2030? I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. Mike Hayes is the Global Head of Renewable Energy and Climate Change and the Decarbonization Lead at KPMG International. Mike is actively involved in European policy areas such as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and EU deforestation regulation, and he sits on various working groups run by the World Economic Forum. Ramon Mendez served as the National Director of Energy in Uruguay between 2008 and 2015. In that role, he helped transform the country's electricity sector, which today gets 98% of its power from renewables. Ramon later served as Uruguay's Secretary of Climate Change, and he is currently Executive Director of Asociación IVI, which helps accelerate a sustainable transition in Latin America. So we'll start with the perspective of the renewable energy buyers. Mike, can you tell us a bit about how KPMG is working to fulfill its own RE100 pledge?
So we are actively, first of all, we're huge supporters of the RE100 pledge, and even more so, the one thing I want to say at the outset is we endorse wholeheartedly the ambition to treble renewable energy capacity. We have, however, a really strong point of view that there are some fundamental challenges in the market, and I'll come back and talk about that during the session. I think we'll have plenty of time. but I think we all want to see the ambition of trebling renewables, but it's going to be a tough journey. For KPMG, this has been a bit of a passion project, and while I work with clients externally, we have a huge team focused on renewable energy procurement. We're an organisation made up of member firms in around 150 different countries around the world, and I'm delighted to say that as of today, we're about 81% renewable energy procurement, and by 2030, we will be 100%. Now, it comes with a slight caveat, because I challenged my internal team, and that's great, but for me, it's a mixture of VPPA. So here in the US, we've actually recently announced a VPPA agreement with one of the biggest developers, NextEra. I'm really proud of that, a fantastic achievement. However, in other countries, we're relying on RECs and IRECs to get there. And I'm going to be pretty blunt, that's not good enough anymore. We really want to prove additionality. And the more we can prove that the renewables we're sourcing is from new renewables, that in turn is going to help with the build. But the challenge is it's not that easy to do it in every single country around the world. And we really want to focus on global organizations in their own operations and as part of their upstream, particularly their upstream supply chains. And that really means being able to do renewable PPAs in lots and lots of different countries. And I can tell you, and I won't get too specific, I don't want to offend anybody, but there are lots of challenges in doing renewables, particularly when you need to do virtual power purchase agreements.
And I'm sure our audience may be familiar already, but if you don't mind kind of clarifying a bit the distinction between a VPPA,
Sure.
the REC, the IREC.
Well, in very, very simple terms, when we work with clients and they say they want to eliminate or at least reduce their Scope 2 emissions, and today actually we're using the power purchase agreement concept to reduce Scope 3 emissions as well by putting in place framework agreements that suppliers can lock into, which is very powerful. And we always look to see what type of power purchase agreement, how are we going to procure the renewable energy? And there's a number of different structures in the market. We won't have time to get into all of them. Clearly, we look at on-site generation as one of the options, and it tends to be cheaper, not necessarily always. But there's a different model, which in many ways is almost like a financial product, where the actual renewable energy is generated in a completely different location. It's sold onto the grid. The corporate that we're representing is buying just power off the grid, but through a financial instrument, we match it up so that in effect we're buying that renewable power, which is produced elsewhere, and there's no direct wire into the operation. And VPPAs have just helped to scale the renewables, but again, there's a lot of countries, particularly in emerging markets, and it's one of the challenges I work closely with organizations like the UN, UNDP and World Economic Forum. We're really trying to unravel some of the complex regulations that are preventing scaling of renewables in these markets.
Thank you. Ramon, as the National Energy Director, you were instrumental in getting Uruguay's grid almost entirely free of fossil fuels. What were some of the keys to your success, and what were some of the hardest parts?
A lot of them. So, I mean, what we proved in Uruguay that in fact decarbonization is possible, and in fact it's cheapest, because we know that today we have technologies that are the best option, not even if climate change didn't exist. Renewables nowadays deliver the best option at the national level. It's the cheapest option in the large majority of our countries. It brings you independent on crazy fluctuation of energy commodity prices, as bring you stabilized cost, then creates millions of jobs. So apparently it's the best option. So what is going on? What's happened? Well, in Uruguay, in our case, 15 years ago, we began the transition. And after a rapid learning curve, in only 5 years, we succeeded to go from 50% of fossil fuel to only 2% of fossil fuel. And this was because of a complementarity of different renewable sources. Nowadays, about 40 to even 50% of our electricity is coming from intermittent sources. With no single battery storage, just using hydro, we have hydro, but the total amount of intermittent sources triples the amount of hydro with reservoirs. So we really did something absolutely different. And the most interesting point is that we succeeded to decrease by a factor of 2 the average cost of the electricity we consume in the country. And we stabilized the cost. We didn't suffer, for example, what happened with the tragic war in Europe the last years. So this is possible. So why is it not being done all over the world? What is going on? And the fact is, as Mike is saying, I mean, in fact, we are not having the appropriate scene in order things to happen. We are trying to put renewables with regulation, laws, institutions, markets that had been built for fossil fuels. And this was true because, I mean, this was okay because this was the past for the last decades or century. But now, for the new reality, we have to really think out of the box. And this is perhaps that's something that I would try to share with you, how we did it and what can be replicated elsewhere.
Can I build on what Ramon had said about why it's not happening? It's very clear, and this is the fundamental point. I go to COP every year and people talk about phase down and phase out and transition away and all these terms, and that's all great. I don't buy it, however, to be blunt. The fundamental problem I see is, and the fossil fuel industry knows this, until we have renewables at a point where we're properly scaling it, we do not have the alternative. You cannot just switch down oil and gas and coal because you have to accept one proposition. The world needs energy, and unfortunately, demand is rising, particularly we're seeing the impact that AI is having. So this is simple maths in my friend. Energy demand is going up. It has to be met from somewhere. At the moment, fossil fuels is still dominating the energy mix. It's 82% of the energy mix, despite all the fantastic things that have happened. Why is renewables not moving? And that's what we need to do is stop talking about phasing down fossil fuels, in my humble opinion. Talk about the positive. How do we ramp up renewables? And it's not rocket science. Look at this from the perspective of developers. And I work with the renewable developers all over the world. And I got involved in this industry in 1999. It changed my life because these were people who were entrepreneurial, who built something completely new, and yet were still putting blockages in their way. The barriers. Planning permission. In most countries around the world, it is a joke how long it takes to get planning permission. For me, the two big solutions and the two big longer-term solutions are solar and offshore wind. Solar is thriving actually and doing very well. Offshore wind as an industry is suffering badly because floating offshore wind, which is one of the really great solutions, we conceivably do not see that hitting scale until the mid-2030s at best. So that issue about planning is a fundamental issue, and that builds into lots of the policy issues as well. The second issue is grid. Unless we really, rethink about how we invest in grid, and personally, and again I'm going to express a sort of a view here, at the moment grids tend to be in public ownership. I'm sort of maybe on behalf of KPMG, I'm not so sure. I'm convinced we need to think about, we need to think about vastly increasing the amount of grid that's available, but we need to think about how public and private can work together, and public-private partnerships is a solution. All over the world we used to build the highways and motorways we have today. It can still work as a public asset, and I think the grid should be a public asset, but there's a way to finance a grid. So grid for me is the second area. And thirdly, policies. I mean, I'm going to look north of the border here in Canada, and I've worked with lots of Canadian clients. It's only in certain states that you can do PPAs in Canada. Like, that's just an example of policy measures that are just getting in the way. So I will tell you, the life of renewable energy developers, and I feel really, really strongly about them as a community and what they've done to really help change our world. But there's the amount of barriers that have been put in their way. And I could talk about supply chains. I could actually, I don't want to be really provocative, I could open up a really interesting discussion about how the nature agenda, which we equally endorse as well, but it's becoming more difficult to meet the requirements of nature and biodiversity and to meet the requirements of clean energy developers. And many developers will tell you those two issues are starting to clash. So we are hitting, I'll stop now after this, but we are hitting the rough patch. We have the ambition, but we have really slowed down fundamentally. We're nowhere near trebling renewable energy capacity. And I would say at this event and at COP29, we should talk about the Great Reset. We need to fundamentally rethink about how we're going to change global energy systems.
Yes, let me add on that. I absolutely agree with you, Mike. We are not talking about fighting fossil fuels, but how to make renewables possible. This is the best things to focus on. So what we did in particular in Uruguay, well, first of all, we dramatically changed the way we plan the systems. We dramatically changed the way we operate the system. We stopped talking about firm capacity and these kind of things that are not useful for thinking highly renewable systems. In fact, what we showed is that the complementarity between different sources makes the system powerful and makes the system robust. And we had to develop a brand new model in order how to operate, and this same model leads us how to expand the system in order to get the job. And only a few years, in 4 years, we make a dramatic, we haven't doubled, tripled, multiplied by 10 the amount of renewables. We multiplied it by 100 in only 4 years. And this was crucial in order to displace the fossil fuel. The fossil fuel generators are still there, but they're just last recourse. Just only when there is no water, when there is no sun, when there is no biomass waste, when there are no wind, only in this case, as an insurance policy, fossil fuels are there, and this amounts for no more than 2%. But not only we had to change dramatically the way we plan and we operate the system, we also changed the way we see the market. We need different market. Renewables are just financial business. So if they are financial business, the most important is to diminish risk perception by investors. So we dramatically work with investors, and we attracted, you know, how much? $6 billion. Uruguay is only $50 billion economic country. So $6 billion is 12% of the GDP. Imagine what is 12% of United States GDP, for example. We got this in only 4 years. And this made a dramatic change. We created 50,000 new jobs, and this is 3% of the labor force of the country. 3%. Once again, if you compare to America, it's something like millions of new jobs just in 4 years, okay? And what is the new market? Well, the new market is based, it's not a short-term spot energy market, it's long-term procurement contracts. The 100% of Uruguayan demand is under long-term contracts. The spot market is there, but it's playing no role. I mean, there's no a single generator working in the spot market. The spot price is almost zero all the time. So we're buying capacity and not buying energy. And this dramatically changed the way you realize how the system can work. But this is the kind of things that, as Mike is saying, this is the kind of things that we have to really think differently in order to stop thinking that energy transition is just adding renewables to the grid. Nothing is farther from the truth. We really need to make dramatic change, but it's possible.
So to make it worse before we make it better, I mean, I think what you've done in Uruguay is just incredible. We talk a lot about the developed world, but we should never forget the developing world, which is where climate is not going to, is hitting, and it's hitting severely. We have real challenges in scaling renewables. On top of the challenges I spoke about, and this is some of the work that I'm sure there's many people in this room and certainly many people attending Climate Week, and I've been with some meetings with the UN this morning talking about this. We need to figure out emerging market risk. We need to figure out things like foreign exchange risk. We need to figure out things like political risk. And we need to figure out even those basic issues that can come up in emerging markets about uncertainty over land ownership. There's a suite of fundamental problems. And you mentioned investors. The developers are ready to develop. What we need is to get to the investors, you know, and there's loads of good developers out there. There's both local developers and international developers. But we need to get the investment community to accept and recognize, yes, there's different risk, but it's a different risk reward mechanism. And that's one of the fundamental things we need to do to actually move the dial in this agenda. It's not easy because investors they're always looking for new projects to put their money in. Yep, I get that. But we're the pace at which we're attracting them, particularly into Middle Africa, parts of LATAM, only parts of LATAM and Southeast Asia is way too slow, and there's a lot of work to be done to de-risk it. But bear in mind, we have all of this, what I call we've got concessional capital, which is coming from philanthropic investors, it's coming from governments, things like the Green Climate Fund, and then we have all the multilateral banks providing a different layer of capital. There's a lot of capital there to de-risk investment into these emerging markets. But I think that's one of the, so in addition to the other challenges I articulated, that for me is the single other big challenge that we need to focus on. Nobody ever said this is going to be easy, and we're under no illusion, but by God, we have to do something.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you, Mike. You know, I used to say that we have to create a new narrative, because narrative is crucial. 10 years ago, we were fighting against fossil fuels because they were the bad guys. But now we have somewhere with a lot of sex appeal, which are renewables. It's the best option for all of us. So we have to build this narrative. If we create the appropriate narrative, then a lot of barriers will fall down. For example, the social permits, which are the difficulty in a lot of countries. And if all the countries align on that direction, I mean, things are becoming much more clear for all the permits. What our experience at least was create a long-term commitment that was backed by the entire Uruguayan political system. We had a long-term agreement. This was already 13 years from now, yes, 14 years from now, 2011. And this agreement was a long-term agreement that was backed by the entire Uruguayan political parties represented in parliament. So this was crucial in order to decrease risk perception, because if all governments are going to follow exactly the same policy, then this is the panacea for investors.
And Ramon, you talk about governments, but you've touched as well on one of the other fundamental aspects if we're going to solve this, which is just transition. And this is about people and it's about community. I think in the audience here I have a colleague, a very young colleague who's brilliant, Avery Johnston, and we've brought her she's bringing this just transition mindset to everything we're doing. And the developers and the investors who recognize the importance of just transition, they're the ones that will succeed. And that's why, you know, I was fascinated when you talked about the jobs that have been created in Uruguay. Like you're absolutely right. The narrative has to change. We need a more positive narrative, but an inclusive narrative that brings community with us. And too often, I didn't get into this in detail, but community will resist new development, and that is an issue for developers. There's a way to do this, and good developers understand that, and that's true in all parts of the world, but particularly in emerging markets. Yeah,
and you know what? The first point is to decrease the electricity bill. If you decrease the electricity bill, this is already something for everybody, and if renewables allows us to do that. And on the second point, yes, you use the energy transition in order to reach some points of the territory where it was very far away. Now 99.9% of Uruguayan households have electricity. And this is also because of the modularity and the possibilities that renewables can allow you to do. Yes, having, in fact, we put, perhaps we were the first in doing that, we put the access to energy as a human right in the country. It's considered a human right as having access to food or to housing or health. Access to energy is considered as human right in Uruguay. And this was crucial in order to be sure that this transition was going to everybody, that no one was leaving ahead.
And you both work with either clients or kind of policymakers in a variety of countries around the world. And I'm curious, when we think about the just transition and sort of these challenges, how they differ in a place that might be, you know, rich in fossil fuel resources, like the United States or Venezuela, for example, how that narrative is a little bit different, how those challenges are different, where you're trying to shift an economy, you know, versus sort of in a place that really needs that affordable electricity.
Yeah, I'll kick off. Don't forget, governments around the world are revising their NDCs, which is in effect their climate transition plans. So they are coming out to be ready for next year, the third generation NDCs. This is going to determine how these governments are going to get countries to net zero. Energy transition will be a fundamental part of this. So I'm hoping that actually, whether we like it or not, and I like it, that governments are going to up the game in terms of policy. And there's both positive policy and negative policy, carrots and sticks, whatever words you want to use. We've seen the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US. We see it a little bit where I live in Europe with the European Green Deal. But also, I'll give you one other example where policy is having an impact, and you referred to it in your introduction. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. You might say, what has this got to do with all of this? But this is a brilliant example. For those of you who don't know, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is this, call it a tax that's going to be imposed on goods from various industries coming into the European Union from the end of next year onwards, or 2026 onwards. Things like iron and steel, aluminium, cement, and it's going to get extended. It is a very material hit to your profit and loss and balance sheet. But by changing the way you produce iron and steel or aluminium, by bringing in renewables, not not virtual ones, interestingly, just direct wire renewables, you reduce your exposure to CBAM. So that's an example of a policy that actually affects the demand side and just really helps to move the agenda. For those countries that are rich in fossil fuels, it's not easy, but like I keep reminding people, don't forget the elephant in the room, climate change and the climate crisis. It's real. It's not going to decide I'm going to pick those countries that are heavy on fossil fuels or not. It's going to impact all of us. And I think, honestly, we really have to change the way people think and the way people vote and the way people invest. For me, it comes down to individuals. Like, get real about this. Like this, we are running out of time, seriously.
Yeah, I think that for geopolitics of the 21st century, I mean, carbon border will be much more important than free trade agreements, because this will be the way. I mean, if I'm a Chinese and I'm spending a lot of money in order to decarbonize my economy, if I'm going to export goods from other countries, so I want them to do exactly the same, because my consumers want to do that. And this is the same happening in Europe as is going to happen in the States. So if the global south is willing to sell goods to the global north, and the global north is doing a good effort, then the carbon border will appear all over this 21st century. So even if we don't want to change the way we produce, the way we get the welfare of our economy, we have to change that, because otherwise we won't be able to be part of the 21st century economy, global. I mean, there's no chance in not to do that. But if you are a coal or natural gas or oil producer country, you can do the first step. The first step is to decarbonize your power mix, because this is sovereign energy also. It belongs to you. It's your wind, your sun, your water, your biomass waste, whatever. So you can use it, but we can, at the same time, you have to have a dramatic change in what you produce as oil, natural gas, or coal producers. And this is going to be demand, because the demand is going to decrease. So even if you want to do it or not, you will have to do it in order to be part of this 21st century. There's no option.
We have a few minutes left, so Mike, I want to ask you two questions in one. If you could talk a bit about sort of the actions that are needed at COP29 in Azerbaijan to address this tripling renewables pledge, and then if you could tell us a bit about the initiative you're involved with at the World Economic Forum to, as we've been talking about, phase down coal and scale up renewables.
Well, they're both combined, because that's going to be a big feature at COP. So maybe I'll explain the latter one first of all. And Sonia, who can't be with us today, was going to talk about some very interesting developments, which I'll mention very briefly. I'm involved in this incredible project and very privileged to be involved with the World Economic Forum, where we're tackling this whole question of coal-fired plant phase down. And it's called the Coal to Renewables Initiative. People forget it's to renewables, because you do need the energy. And I'll explain it very, very simply, but it's fascinating. What we've been able to do is, if you take that the current cost of finance, let's say, is 8% for a lot of these coal-fired power plants, through the use of concessional finance and de-risking measures, we're able to bring in new investors who will come in, let's say, at 6%. These are just illustrative figures. What that does, it creates this extraordinary equity uplift for the coal-fired plant owner. And you might say, why am I doing this? But the quid pro quo is, we give it with one hand to the coal-fired plant owner, but we take it with the other hand. The condition for getting this cheaper financing is you have to shut down the coal-fired plant. Depending on what the financial model says, it could be 5, 10, 15 years. The carbon abatement impact of that is unbelievable. Like, of all the different things you do, and coal still makes up 37% of our energy mix. Do not forget that. There are 6,000 of these plants around the world. So what we're trying to do is, we're working with energy regulators. We're starting with a couple of countries, Philippines, Malaysia, and Colombia, but this will become a global movement. And really what we're doing is, I'm happy to share details with anybody who's interested. We're going to create a coalition of clean energy finance leaders just to come together, who will support this initiative. It'll be a big announcement at Davos this year. So that's, for me, one of the single biggest things. COP, just very quickly to your second question, and please reach out, I don't have time to get into more details. For me, COP is really about building on everything we've spoken about today. Sonia would have mentioned to you, if she was here, that there is going to be two new global commitments, one on storage and one on grid, going back to what I said at the outset. The one on grid, I believe, is a commitment to build 80 million kilometres of new grid. Think about that. Now, it's a commitment. How we implement it, I'm certainly putting forward the idea of public-private partnerships. I will be echoing that in a really big way at COP. And the other point I want to bring up, we keep talking about the additional energy coming from AI and data centers. We need to start thinking about how AI can help us accelerate. And when you get in and understand the mechanics of renewables development, and we've been looking at this as a firm and we'll be presenting it at COP, how AI can help you with site selection, with procurement, with renewables auctions. It can make the whole process much quicker. It's not the secret sauce, but it can certainly help. So honestly, this is going to be probably center stage of not just for KPMG, but I think for many different players who will be at COP. And I'm looking forward to it because it's a lot of like-minded people at all of these sessions at COP, but it's a real opportunity to energize the debate and really focus. We have 6 years to 2030. I just keep reminding people of that.
Well, that's all the time we have today, but thank you both for this really interesting discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, I'd now like to invite Femi Gasela to join me as we take a closer look at how South Africa is taking on the energy transition. Femi is the Chief Director of International Climate Change Relations and Reporting at South Africa's Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. She leads efforts in addressing global climate challenges with a focus on vulnerable communities, and she's coordinating South Africa's engagement in the multilateral climate change fora and is leading efforts to form South Africa's position under the UNFCCC. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
South Africa has made significant strides in advancing renewable energy projects, particularly through initiatives like the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. Can you elaborate on South Africa's progress so far in transitioning to renewables and the challenges the country still faces?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. We have made substantial progress in advancing renewable energy, particularly through the Renewable Energy Independent Power Procurement Program. Since its inception, we have been enabled to significantly make capacity in terms of wind, solar, and other renewables, adding to thousands of megawatts to the national grid. This has not only diversified our energy mix, but it has also attracted billions of investments, created jobs, and stimulated local manufacturing. However, despite these challenges, despite these successes, challenges still remains. The transition has to address infrastructural bottlenecks, such as grid connectivity and reliability. As you know, we suffer from a lot of power cuts, and socioeconomic disparities. Ensuring that the benefits of renewable energy reach all South Africans, especially in rural and underserviced communities, is a key priority for the government. Additionally, navigating the political and economic complexity of transition from coal, which still forms a backbone of our energy sector, present further challenges. These underscore the need for clear policy alignment, robust public-private partnership, and long-term financial commitment. So you can see that we still have those kind of challenges that we have to grapple with. Mm-hmm. Despite the successes we have.
Thank you. And South Africa has been vocal about the need for international financing to help developing nations reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. So you mentioned, financial commitments. What kind of funding mechanisms does South Africa want to see more of, and what will you be pushing for in the run-up to the COP29 negotiations?
Well, as we approach COP29, one of our key asks is for an increase in concessional financing that is low interest and long term. This allows developing countries like ours to invest in clean infrastructure without exacerbating existing debt burdens. We also want to see scale up of grant-based funding, particularly for adaptation projects, which are critical for vulnerable communities that bear the brunt of climate impact. Another important mechanism is blended finance, where public funds can help de-risk private sector investment in renewable energy projects. The Just Transition Investment Partnership should strive to provide more grant-based funding to allow South Africa to transit in a just manner. Retiring old coal-fired power station will require substantial financial support. The same applies to introducing electric vehicles, your green hydrogen, as per the JET IP. So those are the things that we would want to see. And when we speak about a just transition, we're saying a just transition must be economic-wide, and it must not leave anyone behind.
Well, and that leads into our next question about just energy transition in South Africa. I'm curious if you could talk sort of specifically for your country what that looks like, what programs the country is implementing or considering to bring workers, communities, and supply chains along from sort of what is today mostly fossil-based economy to clean energy economy.
Well, just energy transition for South Africa must be inclusive, equitable, and people-centered. And this must ensure that no one is left behind. It must be an all economy-wide transition. It's not just about replacing coal with solar panels and wind turbines. It's about ensuring that workers, communities, and industry reliant on fossil fuel are not left behind. For us, just transition creates new sustainable jobs in clean energy sectors while providing retraining, reskilling, and social protection for workers displaced by the phase-out of coal. Furthermore, this will contribute to technological development, transfer, as well as ensuring security in South Africa through the expansion of installed renewable energy capacity, introducing electric vehicles, green hydrogen. We're already implementing various programs to support this vision. For instance, the Presidential Climate Commission is driving just transition framework, which includes engagement with government, with business, labor, and civil society. Through this consultation, we're crafting policies that support local economic diversification, coal-dependent region. We're also developing initiatives to bring marginalized groups such as women, youth, and small businesses into clean energy value chains, ensuring that they benefit from the new economic opportunities. Ultimately, our transition must balance environmental sustainability, which is something that is very important, with social justice, ensuring that it contributes to addressing unemployment, inequality, and poverty while building climate-resilient economy. The implementation of Climate Change Act will also provide a key legislative framework to help South Africa to implement a just transition.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we have time for one quick bonus question, but I'm curious, as you know, we're heading into the COP29 negotiations, thinking about efforts to scale renewables. What makes you most hopeful? What are you looking forward to the most in sort of the run-up to this busy season?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting the new quantifiable goal, to have at least a decision on that. And I am hoping that COP29 will be able to bring that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your insights. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And I will now hand it back to Ollie for the final part of the session. Thanks.
Thank you. So thank you, Maria. I hope you've enjoyed both the panel and that conversation there with Remy. We're now, as I mentioned at the start, going to take a closer look at the private sector's role in the energy transition. So with me today, I have the pleasure of introducing Gregory Carley, who is the Executive Advisor and leads the Sustainability, Resilience and ESG practice within GHD's advisory team. He oversees the strategic integration of sustainability and resilience principles across a range of sectors, including energy, property and buildings, and transport. So we've heard from a variety of perspectives so far, the buyer side and the government perspective. So Greg, your role, you meet corporates every day.
Yes.
Who are facing the challenges and opportunities that have come up in the previous conversations. What would you say are practical things that the private sector can do to speed up this transition?
Sure. Thanks, Ollie, and thank you for having me here today. Look, I think the challenges are very significant for leaders of companies and private sector. They see the challenges. GHD did a sustainability monitor earlier this year where we found that 79% of corporate executives feel there's a significant or moderate gap between their ambition and their goals and targets. And certainly renewables are a key aspect of that and building that into their portfolio. We work day in, day out with corporate clients who are really trying to decarbonize or come to net zero and meet their net zero targets. And they see some strong challenges in the renewable space and also trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It really comes down to two things, I think. Companies are interested in cost and making sure they have cost certainty and risk. And I think one of the big challenges they find with the renewable area is continuing to manage that risk. And again, it can be a cost risk, it can be an uncertainty or regulatory risk. So the more we can help that be streamlined and make sure that the projects are de-risked or the opportunities for them are de-risked are really important for corporates to be able to purchase renewables and use renewables as part of their portfolio.
Yeah, I'm staggered at that 79% stat.
79%. Yeah. The gap is significant, and trying to bridge that gap and bring and actualize their corporate goals and targets into reality is a big step. Yeah, big gap.
Yeah. So you mentioned risk, and you mentioned it from the financial perspective, but also from regulatory risk as well. So just want to ask you a question around how you feel like corporates can work with governments, and I guess to get some of that certainty that they might need in policy.
Yeah, I think that there has to be those partnerships. They have to work hand in hand. I think in the sessions that I participated in yesterday and today, that collaboration piece is critical. And that's collaboration between corporate entities and governments and policymakers in order to be able to provide access to renewables that are de-risked and make sure there's certainty in the supply as well. I think we talked about earlier today how far we are behind on meeting some of these targets and goals and producing enough renewable energy, but really that work together to accelerate the amount of renewable opportunities and renewable power available is really critical in order to make that work and make that happen. Right?
Mm-hmm. And what would you say are practical ways companies can do that with governments or in action that they take themselves, as in to get that sort of availability of renewables?
I think it's working together, working as part of trade organizations or industry organizations or sector-based programs that partner with government to set that policy, to really help with investors and making sure investors are available on that side. It's really, I don't think it's doing anything new or different. It's really just accelerating what we already know to do, and that's working in those spaces with the right people at the right times and advocating. Because you see it day in, day out that they want to do things. I'm working with a global client right now, restaurant client, McDonald's. You may have heard of them. They're really struggling on that balance between reducing energy use and greenhouse gases in their restaurants and purchasing renewable electricity. They are a global client. They work in almost every country in the world. Buying renewable energy in some countries is really difficult for them. And that plays into their decision making on whether it's a CapEx or an OpEx spend they need to do. So being able to work with different governments and additional agencies around the globe to be able to have that certainty for them is a really critical aspect as part of their net zero targets to 2030 and then ultimately 2050 net zero targets. Yeah.
Now, the certainty bit is key, right?
It's
in business decisions, but also in a decision to whether to build a renewables project. Yeah, the investment decision needs to add up and need long-term certainty on that. So
the more we can provide certainty for the private sectors, the more they will invest and the more they will get on board with renewables and purchasing. They want to. It's just making sure the certainty's there.
Great. So I just wanted to, I guess, as we start to wrap up the session, to bring us back onto the tripling renewables pledge by 2030. What would you say makes you most hopeful that we will achieve this, and looking forward to 2030?
I think most hopeful is that there is a genuine interest, the genuine recognition by people that we need to keep moving faster. And I think the more I talk and the more I listen to some of these sessions, that urgency is there. And you hear that urgency in people's voices and what they're trying to do. So I think the will is there, the vision is there. It's time, right, to make it action and make it actionable. And I think that's what we need to see happen. But the fact that the will is there is the first step, and now we just have to get busy and roll our sleeves up and make it happen.
Yeah, no, agreed. That's exactly. We need to go on with action now and turn these words into action. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Greg, for your time today. Anything additional you want to just say before we wrap up?
No, I think, it's like I say, the challenges for companies are really, really critical. And we've heard from some companies today and corporates that are at the leading edge. They're being forefront, they're being in the bold. And those are great. And we need to keep promoting that and looking at that. But we also need to recognize there's a lot of companies that don't want to be the leaders, right? They want to be sort of the next in line, or fast followers, or even sometimes they're kicking and screaming coming into these things, into renewables. So we have to recognize that that may be harder for them sometimes to really make things happen, and we have to make sure it's easy for them as well, and we can make sure that it makes sense from a cost perspective and a risk perspective, and they will get on board. But not everybody wants to be bold and be at the forefront. So we got to remember that there's a lot who want to be, podium finish is fine for them in this sense, right? So
yeah, I think you're right. The sort of middle
tier,
companies are looking at this, wanting to do it, not quite sure, and I guess that's where an organisation like yours is really well placed to help those companies.
Yeah, and that's where we can get it down to a most basic, right? When we look at cost and we can make it affordable and make the return on investment make sense. Again, I'll go back to that McDonald's. When we went into their leadership and said, look, you can save billions of dollars a year over time, it was like, okay, why aren't we doing this? So they're driving in that direction when they see that good business case, and it really comes down to a good business case to make it happen. So we really need to provide that mix of that engineering, because it's an engineering problem where there's a technical solution, but we also need to make sure that the business case is there to make it work, and companies will buy in.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time then, Greg, for today. Okay, so...
Thank you.
That being for Greg, and thank you to all our panel speakers today across the event. I hope you have enjoyed it. So we'll wrap up now. So I think we've heard from some really good perspectives on what's needed to meet this tripling pledge by the end of the decade. So we have, just 6 years to go. It's a real far off sort of target that we've set ourselves, but it is possible to reach, and we've heard about some actions that we can take to get there. What I would say from the RE100 perspective, we've talked a lot about collaboration and how we can bring together companies and aggregate their voice and send a clear message to policymakers of what's needed. And I think that collaboration between corporates and policymakers, as we've heard today, is really key to making that happen. I mean, let's get down to the point of it. It's going to need investment, both public and private. So we need to find ways to unlock both of those, and particularly on the private side. And I think certainty, as Greg was saying, is very key to that. And so hopefully we can move forward with that. Okay, so that wraps up the session. There is a short break, and then in 10 minutes' time, we have our next session in here. So thank you very much for your time today.